Hi, welcome to the Texier House, a museum of all things Watchung. First of all, you are in the back entry of the Texier House. The Texier House was actually the home of a man named Hippolyte Texier. The house was built around 1890, and his family actually lived here. He raised his children here, and he also had a business across the street. He processed leather. He had a leather tannery, and he made gloves. The Texier family was considered an affluent family at the time, and this house was considered an upscale home, a luxurious home for its day. The leather factory that he ran for many years was originally the old grain mill, which dates back to the 1700s. And eventually the Texier family gifted the house to the borough, and the borough used it for the police station for a while and then for some administrative offices. But the family actually lived here, and a few years back one of the granddaughters actually visited here, and she was thrilled with what we had done here and the fact that her family was represented in this picture. There is more information on the Texier family. Very prosperous glove factory for many years here. This entryway also houses our most prized treasure, which is a stained glass window from Moldenke Castle, a castle that was here in Watchung. And pieces were pried out, and it was gifted to us, and we eventually had it restored, and it is a beautiful reminder of the beautiful castle that was once in Watchung. You'll also notice that we have some pictures and some history of the castle in this area, but we will have much more about the castle in the next room. Over on the other wall is a few pictures of our first mayor, Harry MacDonald. We have a picture of Mayor MacDonald fishing, and we have a picture of his horse and buggy and his cow, and we think it's fitting that the first mayor get a little recognition in the entryway. And this display over here is a little bit about the development of this museum. We only opened in 2013, and it's been a labor of love for the Historical Committee. Now I'd like to move you into the hallway where we have some displays of wars. Moving on to this little hallway here, we have the World Wars. World War II, we have a list of all the people who served in World War II from Watchung. We have the famous picture of the flag raising on Iwo Jima, some medals, the Gold Star. And of particular interest is this recent acquisition, which is a piece of trench art. And when the gentleman called to tell me that he wanted to donate trench art from World War I thought, I don't know what trench art is. Well, I soon discovered what trench art is. Trench art in World War I, when they actually were in the trenches, when they were resting behind the lines, they would take bullet casings from battleship bullets and turn them into works of art or little boxes, and there is engraving on this. This one says 1918. Don't know who carved it or who made it, but it is one of our treasures. We also have samples of ration books, and I remember those from standing in line because butter was rationed. Meat was rationed, and you had to have a certain number of coupons before you could buy a pound of butter or a package of nylons or something. So these are all memories from the World War. Pictures of our veterans. And during World War II, we actually had air raid drills. And at the time, if we had a drill, that meant that we had to either shut off the lights in our houses, or we had blackout shades, and we would pull down the blackout shades and be very quiet, because you did not know when the German planes would be flying over. Well, in Watchung, we didn't have a very fancy way of notifying people that we were having an air raid drill. So the air raid warden would go to the center of Watchung, and he had this gadget, and he would turn this, and believe me, it gets very loud. I won't do it loud, but this actually would notify all the residents of Watchung that pull down your blackout shades or close your lights. And of course, this is a big hit with the school children, and I do make it go a little bit louder for them. They love to hear that. So that's World War II, and a lot more about World War I and II on the other side of the aisle. You can come back and look at it if you want. Over here, I promised you some more information about the old mill and Mr. Texier's glove factory. Well, here's a picture of the old mill, which dates back to the 1700s. It was first used as a grain mill, and it went through a variety of owners until finally 1890 Mr. Texier bought it and turned it into a glove factory. And now it is where Borough Hall is. This is the Borough Hall was built from that old mill. And here we see a variety of stages of our Borough Hall. The 2 is missing. We don't know what happened to the 2. We have 1926 up there because Watchung actually did not exist as an official borough until 1926. Before that, it was called Washingtonville. At one time, it was called Browstown. It was considered part of Plainfield at one time. It was considered part of North Plainfield at one time, part of Warren. But it wasn't until 1926 that it was officially the Borough of Watchung. So now, I promised you more about the castle, so we're going to move into the castle room. Okay, well, we call this the castle room for good reason. This whole side of this room is pretty much dedicated to the castle, and here you have another opportunity to look at our stained glass window in all its glory. But yes, a little bit more about the Moldenke Castle. The Moldenke Castle was a replica of a castle that was on the Rhine River, and it was built by the Moldenke brothers to honor their mother. And it was built between 1900 and 1930. It took 30 years to finish the castle, and it was a real castle. It was on 55 acres of land, and it had a multitude of rooms. It had a cannon on the roof. It was a real castle. The Moldenke brothers and Charles and Richard built it. Richard actually and his family lived in the castle most of the time. Richard Moldenke was a metallurgist, and both brothers were very well educated for that time. Richard wrote many books on metallurgy. He was a particular expert in iron founding and lectured all over the country, and was a consultant to many businesses about forging iron and other metals. Charles was a botanist who did a lot about classifying the flora and fauna of this area. So they both were very learned men. And Charles was also an Egyptologist, and we have some artifacts in this case. People often ask, why do you have Egyptian stuff in here? And it's because Charles had done some translating of hieroglyphics for the Egyptian government. And as a thank you, they gifted him with some artifacts from a real Egyptian tomb, like a pyramid. So we're very, very lucky to have that. So you will see pictures and artifacts from the castle in these cases. Now back to its little bit of history. The Moldenke brothers sold the castle to the Herrick family. And Dr. Herrick was a scientist, and he had a business, and he had a chemical lab in the basement, and owned the castle until the early 60s. By that time, that family had fallen on a little hard times and were having difficulty keeping up the maintenance of the castle. And the castle was really looking a little worse for wear. And in the early 60s, he sold it to a developer. Of course, many people in Watchung wanted to save the castle, and just about the time that the residents were mobilizing to at least save the castle burned. And we have a picture of the castle burning, which was, you know, to those of us on historical especially, a real tragedy. Well, after the castle burned, they did allow residents to go in and take artifacts. I mean, they had an auction, and they auctioned off anything of value, like a Civil War cannon was on one of the turrets of the castle, and that was auctioned off. Anything of real value was auctioned off, but they let, you know, residents come in, and some of us pried tiles off the walls, and some of those are in this case. My husband and I actually carried that cart out from the basement. It was in the laboratory, and it was all stained, and I actually used it as an appliance cart for a long time down the shore, and now donated it. There is also, the Moldenke Castle also had a crypt, which housed the bodies of the family members. And the crypt, believe it or not, is still standing, although it is on private property. When I was young, growing up, it was a big thing for the young men, especially at Halloween time. It was a big dare to go sneak into and see if you could get into the mausoleum. It was very creepy, and it was a big thing with the youth of that time. When I think of, you know, that was considered really bad mischief. Nowadays, that would be nothing, right? So the rest of the wall, you can see a variety of artists' depiction of the castle and some photographs of the castle. I would like to call your attention to this wood carving of the castle and its surrounding grounds. Catherine Wilmerding, who grew up in Watchung, her married name Catherine Wilmerding Rule, lived across the street from the castle. She was an artist, and she hand carved this frieze of the castle, and it is one of our treasures. And when she learned that we were developing this museum, she donated this to us. She now lives in Florida. She also gifted us with a scrapbook containing her memories of the people who lived in the castle, and it's in a scrapbook on the other side, which is available for you to look at. So we have pictures of the castle and artifacts from the castle in these two museum cases. And of course, another depiction of the castle is in this diorama of Old Watchung, which I'll talk about in a minute. But continuing over here into this part of the museum, we're fortunate in Watchung to have two beautiful lakes, Watchung Lake and Best Lake. And both lakes, believe it or not, were used for ice harvesting. Yes, and remember, there was a time when not everybody had electricity and not everybody had a refrigerator. And before refrigerators and electricity, we had ice boxes. And the iceman would come once a week or twice a week and carry a big square block of ice and plop it down into the top part of the ice box, and that's where you kept your food kind of cold. Well, we have a saw, an ice cutting saw, actually from Watchung Lake, and we have pictures of actually horses, and then later more mechanized, but actually cutting the big blocks of ice from Watchung Lake, and then they were stored in hay-lined barns that were on where the spillway from Watchung Lake was on top of that. The barns were there until they burned down. But believe it or not, they were lined with hay, and that ice would stay pretty much through the summer until more ice could be harvested. And we have a picture of a horse and buggy, the Plainfield Lumber and Ice Supply Company, delivering ice to North Plainfield and Plainfield and surrounding areas, and a picture of the Watchung Lake and the barns. Well, electricity came in, just like buggy whips went out of style, and we no longer needed big chunks of ice. And so Watchung Lake was turned into a swim club, a private swim club owned by the MacDonald family. And sometimes on weekends there'd be 2,000 and 3,000 people at Watchung Lake swimming. And it was a very, very popular swim club. And we have some artifacts in the museum cases here, and some pictures on the wall here of Watchung Lake. Now, of course, the town bought the lake in the 80s, and now it's just a beautiful place to walk around and fish and catch and release fish, and it's no longer a swim club, and we no longer harvest ice. So I said that we were fortunate to have two beautiful lakes in Watchung. We actually had a beautiful waterfall in Watchung as well, Wetumpka Falls. And we have some gorgeous pictures of the falls, the way it was, the way it just a beautiful, beautiful falls, until the flood of 1973, when that flood smashed the falls down until it's just like a little hill now. So unfortunately, we lost our waterfall because of the flood of 1973, and we do have some very good video of that flood. There is still on Somerset Street, about across from the police station, there's a little indentation in the walkway, and if you walk there, you can look over and see what was left of the falls. So that's the falls, and some of us still, when we drive up Somerset Street, we miss looking at that beautiful falls. Can't see it now. We also had a very historic building in Watchung called the Washington House, and it goes back to Revolutionary War days, and it was also a popular spot for Revolutionary soldiers to rest and have some libation and some food. And then it was Demler's Hotel in the 1800s, and then it was purchased by a private developer and was run in the 50s as the Washington House. And it was a very, very popular restaurant, a venue for weddings, a place for showers, and it was also a hotel. And the Washington House was very, very popular until it burned down in 1963, a spectacular fire. The only thing that's left of it on Somerset Street is a wall, and it was about where there's now a business building there, a brick building that houses a modern limb and brace company, and I think a spa. So the Washington House is no more, but that was a building that came from was there at the Revolutionary War time. On this wall we also have an advertisement for the Washington House and a menu. It's very interesting. You can get a hamburger and French fries for $1.10, and you can have a whole roast beef dinner for $4.95, which is certainly not the way it is today. And that's the Washington House. So I guess this really brings us to the Legend of Watchung and some pictures from the depiction of that legend. I guess I need to explain about the Legend of Watchung. The Legend of Watchung goes something like this. A group of Dutch settlers from the Perth Amboy area, and the Perth Amboy area had a very well settled settlement of Dutch, had heard that our valley, our little Watchung Valley, was a good place. It had water, it had fertile fields, it had everything that they would like to expand their settlement. So they traveled the Indian Trail up to Watchung, and they were traveling with an Indian princess from another Lenni Lenape tribe, Princess Wetumpka. And I mentioned Wetumpka Falls before. That was named after our Princess Wetumpka. And Princess Wetumpka was supposedly a beauty, and when the settlers and Princess Wetumpka arrived in this area, a scout from the local tribe saw them and alerted the tribe and sent out a war party, and they captured the Dutch settlers and Captain Michelson, and were going to, they tied them and kept them as prisoners, and were going to kill them and torture them. When Princess Wetumpka pled with to Chief One Feather, the chief, that these were good people and that why couldn't they settle here? There's plenty of room. And so the story goes that Princess Wetumpka was so beautiful that Chief One Feather fell in love with the beautiful Princess Wetumpka. The children all love that story. And she prevailed, and he let the settlers go. And we in Watchung like to say that for many years, and that is true, for many years the settlers and the Lenni Lenape did live peacefully side by side. Later, it sort of fell apart. I always ask the school children, what do you know about legends? Are they always true? And they always chorus no. And then I ask if there could be a kernel of truth in maybe a little bit of a legend, and they always say yes. So, you know, we don't know, but it is our legend, and we call it a legend, and we like our little legend. And so, for many years, in the 20s and 30s, the citizens of Watchung actually reenacted this whole pageant. And because of they could expand or contract that pageant depending on how many actors and actresses they had and how many people they could get to dress up in costume and reenact this whole thing. But it was a big thing, and it was very popular for many years. And then, of course, they stopped doing it. And in the 60s, the Valley Players, which was a theater group in town, they reenacted it one more time. And most of the pictures that we have that show the Legend of Watchung are from the Valley Players' depiction of that. And you can see, I mean, they actually had headdresses and authentic costumes. And in the other room, you'll see a drum, you'll see settlers' caps, and there's a big book about the whole pageant. There was even sheet music, and if another member of our historical committee were here, she and another older member could even sing about Princess Wetumpka. There was even a song written about the beautiful Princess Wetumpka. Had a student, third grade student through here, and I mentioned Wetumpka, and she said, "Oh, Wetumpka, I live on Wetumpka Lane." And I said, yes, and that's where the name comes from. So she made that association, which I thought was cute. And then the next Sunday we were open, and sure enough, that same little girl, she was dragging her father into the museum, and she said, see Daddy, Princess Wetumpka, this is where our street name comes from. So I thought that was cute. Anyway, more artifacts from the reenactment are in this other room. Watchung has always had a historical committee, more or less active. Back in the 70s, the historical committee then developed this wonderful diorama, which is very popular with the school children and most of the visitors. This front part of the diorama depicts old Somerset Street and the Stony Brook. And actually it has the Texier House where we are, right back there, and the Gwinnard House, which is Gwinnard Drive, and the church, which goes up the Hillcrest Road, and the rescue squad would be on this little hill. The Arts Center, which was the old school, you see the little school children spilling down the hill. And this Somerset Street was part of the old Indian Trail, the horse barn, the depiction of ice cutting, the depiction of rock crushing by Wetumpka Falls. And by the way, Wetumpka Falls did provide power for the rock crushers, you know, across the street. This little yellow house that is no longer there was called the Honeymoon Flats. And it was called the Honeymoon Flats because it was apartments where the young couples would live while they were building their houses in Watchung. So this depicts the old Somerset Street, not exactly to scale, but you know, it's certainly of interest, and it's way doesn't look like this today. On the other side of the diorama, we have a typical Lenni Lenape encampment, and the Lenni Lenape were known for this type of a shelter. So that's the Lenni Lenape encampment, and on the other side is a depiction of the castle, and you can see the cannon on one of the turrets of the castle. It was said that the cannon, it was a saying that the cannon was aimed at the Eaton house, because the Eatons, supposedly, I don't know this, supposedly the Eatons and the Moldenkes did not get along. So there was always this saying that the cannon was aimed at the Eaton house, so not sure that that is true. On this side of the diorama is an outhouse, a depiction of an old outhouse, the outdoor toilet. And in the early days of Watchung, it was tradition on the night before Halloween, mischief night, the young men in the area would steal somebody's outhouse and put it somewhere near the center of town. And then the poor people would get up in the morning, Halloween morning, and find they didn't have an outhouse out there. So that's why we have an outhouse on this end, because it was a big thing in Watchung that your outhouse could get stolen. On this side of the room, I'd like to call your attention to pictures from the flood of 73. I told you that the flood of 73 destroyed our beautiful falls, and you can see the damage that it did at the center of town. It really just destroyed the center of Watchung, and there's a wonderful video that really captures the tragedy that was that flood. And there were 5 people who were killed during that flood. It's hard to imagine pickup trucks and cars floating down the Stony Brook. It seems like such a mild little brook, and it was quite the event. Also over here we have the 2 restored scrapbooks of the complete history of Watchung, and these are in specially preserved cases. But if you have time someday, come here and look through. It starts from the beginning with the Indian encampments and goes through modern day in Watchung. So we have a wonderful preservation of our history. At the same time that we're trying hard to capture the history of Watchung and preserve it, we also have to keep up with the current history. So every year we have a scrapbook of clippings and what has happened in the town in that particular year. So there's a whole bunch of scrapbooks from the years since, I guess, for the past 10 years or so that we've had the current historical committee. And in this little corner we have some information about religion in Watchung, the 2 churches, and because we didn't have room over there by Watchung Lake, we have pictures of Bess Lake, which was originally called Wilson Pond, and there's a whole story about how it got to be called Bess Lake, and everybody called it Wilson Pond until the Bess bought the property. And when the surveyor asked Mr. Best, "What's the name of this lake?" he said, "I don't know, we just call it Bess Lake," so because that was his last name. So ever since then we call it Bess Lake. But when it was the ice house, it was known as Wilson's Pond. And finally on this wall, so this is a wall to come back to, this is the original coffee pot that they made coffee, that the Vibrant family made coffee for the teachers in the 2-room schoolhouse on a pot-bellied stove, much like this. So here it is. We kept this brick wall because we just thought it was kind of interesting to have the pot-bellied stove by a brick wall. Well, we're continuing with artifacts from the many reenactments that were done by the residents. We have a drum, and we, if you take a look in here, we even have a program that, you know, from the pageant itself. Contains the complete legend. We have some settlers' caps in here. We have some sheet music that belongs to the reenactment. One of our members, Barbara Dean, was a little girl when some of these reenactments were taking place, and her cap is that white one up there. She donated it too. And we have some bits and pieces of costumes and things that were used in the reenactments. So it was a big deal in Watchung to reenact this whole pageant. And here we have some costumes that were used, and there are some additional pictures. And you can see the elaborate costumes that were used as part of this reenactment. They actually, you know, went behind Borough Hall by Stony Brook and by the falls and scampered through the woods, and, you know, just really made it as authentic as they could. So it was quite the event for many years. We call this the Eaton Room, and rightly so, because Dr. Charles Eaton was probably the most important and influential person who ever came out of Watchung, maybe even Somerset County. For starters, Doc Eaton, as he is well known, was our congressman from this district for 28 years. And although he was a Republican, he was very, very well respected by President Roosevelt and President Truman, and you can see from the pictures on the wall, he's depicted with Truman and Roosevelt. He was held in very high esteem by both sides of the aisle. In fact, almost every piece of legislation that he sponsored got passed. He was considered quite the statesman. In fact, he was so well thought of, he actually signed the UN Charter for the United States, even though he was a Republican and President was a Democrat. So you can see that it was he was quite well respected. Very less known, he was also the author of the Monroe Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, which really saved Europe after World War II. So this is a very, very important man. He also had a family. He had a farm right on Valley Road, and he raised a large family. And the Eaton family has been very generous with giving us artifacts from the family, these pictures, and just recently we have acquired his father-in-law Civil War diary. Now, his father-in-law was Captain William Parlin. His wife was a Parlin. And Captain Parlin was important because he led the 1st Battalion of black soldiers as they were freed from slavery. They were impressed into the North troops. And he writes about this whole interaction of what it took to lead this battalion of black soldiers. And he talks about the white soldiers spitting on the black soldiers and not eating with them and not wanting to touch them. And it's in his original handwriting, but because that's kind of hard to read, we've also typed it out. This is not the original. We have the original under very safekeeping. But the diary is fascinating. If you have some time to actually read the diary, it is a fascinating glimpse into the attitudes of that time. It is very politically incorrect, so if you are going to be offended, don't read it. But it is very, very interesting. We also have Captain Parlin's pistol, and he writes about being grazed in the neck by a bullet, and this is the bullet. The family has given us the bullet. And I was leading a tour here one day, and this man came and he said, you know, he said, that's a Northern bullet. And I said, no, I didn't know that. I said, how come? And he said, well, and he explained all the ways that he knew that that was a Northern bullet. And he said that probably means he was hit accidentally by friendly fire, or the South picked up a spent bullet and, you know, reused it. So anyway, We have the bullet that grazed his neck, which he writes about in his diary. We have his pistol, and we have his cap. And Watchung has honored Doc Eaton. We had a parade about for him, an anniversary of him, and he has been honored by Somerset County. Here in Watchung, we wish that the county would do a little bit more with Doc Eaton as a historical figure, but so far we have not been successful in doing that. He's been on the cover of Newsweek, as you can see. He is an author. He was also a clergyman. He preached in several churches. He worked for the British government. He was a journalist. I mean, this was a very smart man, and a man who accomplished a lot. So we are fortunate to have had him as part of the Watchung story. Some of you might remember O'Connor's Restaurant. It was on Mountain Boulevard for many years, and it was a very, very popular beef and ale house. A lot of people still miss it, but before it was O'Connor's Tavern, back in the Revolutionary War days, it was called Catterling's Tavern, and it was a very popular stopping point between New York and Morristown for the Revolutionary War troops. And it was extremely popular, but in 1889, Henry Pedeflous, who was a chef at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, bought the restaurant, and he ran it for many years as Pedeflous Hotel. And we have the original sign from Pedeflous Hotel. He also established a mushroom farm in the basement of the house, and he ran a very popular hotel and restaurant for many years until O'Connor's bought it. Many important people stayed at the Pedeflous Hotel: Laurel and Hardy, Mae West, Jack Dempsey, to name a few. Actually, Hollywood stars stayed there, many political figures. It was a very, very important building. And some of us were not happy to see it bulldozed down. There were some very interesting menus up there. You can get a whole roast beef dinner at Pedeflous Hotel for $1.95, which is wonderful. And we have a menu from O'Connor's. And O'Connor's restaurant kind of pioneered the salad bar. It was one of the first in the state to have that full kind of salad bar. And we have some of their condiments from there, and a menu that they kindly gave us. We also have a scale from their butcher shop and a sign from the butcher shop. We can't quite figure out a spot for that sign, but we're working on that. They had a wonderful butcher shop, and they had the best meat, and when you really wanted a special roast or a special steak, you went to O'Connor's butcher shop. This is the actual water pump, the well pump from Catterling's Tavern, Pedeflous Hotel, and this pumped the water, and for many years it was in the entryway as an artifact in O'Connor's restaurant. And this was purchased, and both the scale and this were purchased and donated by residents. So many of us still miss O'Connor's restaurant, and you can come back and take a look at the menus and some of the artifacts. Notice that these signs say work in progress. Our little historical committee still has lots of work to do, some cases to fill and refine, and plenty of material upstairs to sort. But here we have a variety of items that we don't quite know what to do with yet, but it is indeed a work in progress, and we're working on it. This is our 9/11 corner, a very sad corner. We had 2 people perish on 9/11. One of them was Chris Ingracia, a wonderful young man who was everything. He was the football star, he was the prom king, he was the handsome boy, he was the popular guy, you know, he was the guy. What a personality. He was everybody's friend, and he was working at Cantor Fitzgerald in the North Tower, and he didn't have a chance. This is a piece, a section of the elevator shaft from the North Tower that his family kindly donated to us. And his family has written a book and has compiled pictures from his life, from his high school years, his years at Princeton. He was a Princeton grad. I mean, everything. This guy had it all. Looks and personality and background and smarts. He had it all. What a tragedy. So we lost Chris, and we also lost a young woman named Honor Wayno. And Honor was on Flight 93. And the story is that she had been to Italy on a destination shower or bridesmaid party, and she got home on a Sunday, and she was supposed to fly out on Monday for another business trip. She did a lot of business traveling. And because she was so tired, she changed her flight to Tuesday. And she was on that flight. And for a few years after 9/11, we didn't really know much about her family. But a few years back, her mother and father came, and they spoke at one of our 9/11 ceremonies. And they spoke about how she called them from the plane and told them what they were going to do, and that she was going to die, and that she loved them, and she wanted them to tell her sister that she loved her. I get a catch in my voice. I just can't imagine being the parents or to even be on that flight and to know that on purpose you're going to die. You're going to die anyway, but they were heroes, those people on the flight. Anyway, that's Honor Wayno. We also have a monument to 9/11. It's across the street from the museum. It's on the village green, and this little photograph album shows the building of that monument, and it got a lot of meaning, and a lot of thought was given to that monument. We also have a flag here that was flown on the Capitol, and we're happy to have this. So these are some pictures from 9/11. I recall 9/11 very well. I was at the time riding on the rescue squad, and I happened to be crew chief that day. And I was up and dressed and ready at 6 a.m. and I had the television on when the first plane hit. And I thought, and then the second plane hit, and I realized, and my phone started to ring, and my pager started going off, and I ran down to the building, and one by one, members started to show up. And people our members, the EMTs took off from work. They came from all over. And as it turned out, we mobilized, the emergency response. We have a system. And we did send an ambulance to Jersey City and a full crew. And as it turned out, they weren't needed because so many people were dead. They didn't need first aid or rescue or transportation to the hospital. They had enough ambulances for that. There were just so many people who died in that. So although we sent an ambulance there, we didn't use the ambulance. And my crewmate and we stayed back in town and covered the town that day. But it is a day I will never forget. And it's a tragic day in our history and a tragic day for Watchung. We call this the community room, I guess for lack of a better name. But on my right, we have our sports wall. And this sports exhibit was done as an Eagle Scout project by Walter Pennett. He did a wonderful job of gathering together all of the most spectacular sports figures that came from Watchung and developed this beautiful display. And we like very much to get the young people involved in in history, because after all, they are our future. So whenever we can, we try to get the young people involved. Now you'll notice that there are many artifacts, pictures on the wall, artifacts in the cases, and each one has a number. And that number corresponds to one of these displays. For example, if you wanted to know what number 17 was a picture of, that's a picture of Billiard, who was an offensive lineman for the New York Giants. Now, I'm not the greatest sports person, but I do know Billiard because he used to play pool with my son in my basement. So I even went to see him play in a game. So that's Billiard. And number 20 is Stephanie Stambow, triathlon, All-American, and each artifact has a number. But probably the most important sports figure that lived in Watchung for many years was Bobby Thompson. And I know as the years go by, fewer and fewer people recognize the name Bobby Thompson. But Bobby Thompson was a giant baseball team, and he was instrumental in winning the pennant for the Giants, and it was named the shot heard round the world. And the background is that the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants were fierce rivals in baseball. There were two baseball teams in New York. And the Dodgers almost always won, and the poor Giants rarely won anything. And this year, the year that Bobby Thompson hit the home run that brought in bases loaded and won the pennant for the Giants, was a really big deal. In fact, such a big deal that the PBS actually did a whole story on the background, and the newscasters kept repeating, "The Giants won the pennant, the Giants won the pennant, the Giants won the pennant." He couldn't say anything more. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of his memorabilia here. Bobby Thompson was a resident for many years. He was a wonderful man, a kind man. He would throw the ball out for Little League many, many years. He gave us his jersey, all these pictures. He was a gentleman. He was always friendly. He was always willing to help with anything in the community. And he only left Watchung when his health began to fail, and he left to live with his daughter. So we are fortunate again in Watchung to have a number of notable sports figures. So that's our sports display. In Watchung, we're lucky to still have a volunteer rescue squad and a volunteer fire department, and in this case and on the wall are pictures from the history of the rescue squad and the history of the fire department. The original ambulance was a Cadillac that was sold to Watchung Rescue Squad, the founding fathers, for $1 by North Plainfield, and it was a very smooth ride, not in fact a better ride than maybe some of the more modern ambulances. The Watchung Rescue Squad has a proud history, and so does the Watchung Volunteer Fire Department. And we have some ancient sirens and ancient pagers and some badges and some things that from years gone by. This display needs a little work too, one of these days. So, but we're still going strong with our volunteer fire and rescue squad. In the corner, we have about our police department. Of course, we do have a paid police department, and we're proud of the great work that they do. This is our school display. Notice we have a sign here called Work in Progress, and that's because we haven't had time, and we really need to gather up a few more artifacts and can't quite figure out how to display that. But you'll notice that we do have some pictures, graduation girls in their white dresses, and we have some postcards of the schools, And here we have a dunce cap. Now, can you imagine today if a student misbehaved, making them sit in a stool in the corner with a dunce cap on? Very politically incorrect. We wouldn't get away with that. We do have a picture of that was done by the art teacher Dot Kenny, and we have a few pictures of the old schoolhouse. Now, the old schoolhouse was originally a two-room structure, and then as they had more students, they lifted up the two-room structure and built classrooms underneath it. Now it serves as the Watchung Arts Center, and that building is still standing. But that's our original schoolhouse and the Arts Center. We have a collection of old books, also some of them politically incorrect, and a sample of an old pencil sharpener, and a few things that might bring back some memories. But again, this is a work in progress. Might seem strange that we have a little corner about the sinking of a steamship in the East River in New York, but there's a reason for that. And the reason is that one of our residents for many, many years, Tiby Wotherspoon, was on the General Slocum steamship. The General Slocum steamship was a cruise ship that a lot of church groups and other clubs and organizations took on a Sunday afternoon. They would get on this steamship and have a picnic, and they would stop and, you know, swim and do a lot of activities. And in 1904, the steamship set sail with it was a ship full of people. And 20 minutes into the cruise, the ship caught on fire. And about 1,000 people died. And a lot of people jumped overboard, and some people were saved, but a lot perished in that fire. Tiby Wotherspoon's mother jumped off the General Slocum with Tiby, who was 6 months old at the time, into the East River. The mother was badly burned on one side, but survived. Her father was also badly burned, survived, but died a couple years later, and the rest of her family perished, along with many cousins and uncles and aunts. Tiby then and her mother moved to Watchung, and she lived in Watchung until her passing at 101 years old. She was the last living survivor of the General Slocum. So what makes this steamship so important? Well, what's important is that, unfortunately, the lifeboats had leaks in them. They didn't work. They couldn't get them detached from the ship. The life jackets were rotted out. The fire hoses on the ship did not work. And it was disgraceful that so many people perished. And as a result of this tragedy, the government stepped in and enacted safety measures so that ships such as this had to have regular drills, and their equipment had to be inspected. And Tiby Wotherspoon was active in much of this in her adult years. And in New York, there is, of course, a whole lot more about the history of the sinking of the General Slocum. But we have some artifacts from Tiby, and Tiby was a member of the Garden Club and the Traffic and Beautification in Watchung, and a wonderful volunteer for us here in Watchung. And in the Star Ledger, there's a whole 2-page spread about a survivor's story. And as I said, she passed away at the age of 101. The General Slocum tragedy had a connection to Watchung. This is another example of getting young people involved. This was another Eagle Scout project we like to call Then and Now. It's pictures of homes the way they were in the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s, and in the other room we've got businesses and local interest pictures. So we had a lot of the pictures of these older homes and their addresses, and then Justin put them together, took current pictures of the way that the homes are now, and put them together as the way they were and the way they are now. and it is really fun to see people who live here, maybe in some of these very same houses, and come in and say, oh, that's my neighbor's house, I didn't know that, and they really spend a lot of time taking a look at these homes from then and now. So yes, we still have homes standing from the 1700s here in Watchung, and homes in the 1800s. Right here is the 601 Valley Road, is the Villa Elsinore, which was across the street from the castle where the Moldenke brothers lived while they were building the castle. And that is still standing, and in fact this needs to be updated. It's been completely redone, and the people who live there now have done a wonderful job restoring it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful mansion. That's 701 Valley Road. Some of these other homes are certainly of interest to people who are in the same neighborhood. Homes of the 1900s are a little more recent, and some are long gone and some are current. The committee was sorting material. We still have boxes and boxes of things that we still need to go through. And a few years back, we came across these rolled pieces of yellowed paper, and we unrolled them, and they immediately slid back together. But when we finally flattened them out, we discovered that they were World War I posters. Buy Liberty bonds or patriotic posters, and it coincided with the 100th anniversary of the United States getting into World War I, which was 1917. And in 2017, museums in New Jersey were all encouraged to develop displays dedicated to World War I. And it was just about the time that we found these posters. So we had them mounted. You'll see some of them are frayed. They were yellowed. Some of them are in better shape than others. But we did the research on the artist and the poster itself, and we mounted them, and it was supposed to be a temporary display. But we liked the display so much we can't quite bear to take it down. So really belongs with our World War I display, but we don't have room for it in that hallway. We also have a trench dagger, which is really a frightful weapon. It is a three-sided, sharp instrument with brass knuckles, and it was used for hand-to-hand combat. Can you imagine if you lightly touch that dagger, you can see how sharp it is, and what a deadly wound that would really inflict. It's a terrible thing. So you notice we have it up high so the children can't touch it. And over here we do have a World War I grave marker, and we're happy to have that. So these posters are really a treasure, and we do treasure these posters. We also have in Watchung a very historic and interesting cemetery called God's Acre. It is by Watchung Lake, between the lake and the restaurant Water and Wine. If you go by on Sterling Road, it's easy to miss it, but it is gated, and it's called God's Acre. And this was another Eagle Scout project, and we didn't even know this until our Boy Scout researched all the graves in this cemetery. There are 2 Revolutionary War veterans buried there, 4 Civil War veterans buried there, 5 Mayflower descendants buried there, and many individuals buried are related by birth or marriage. It is an actual history book of the early families of Watchung. One of the Revolutionary soldiers was a Smalley, who was the founding father of Warren, and at that time it contained the area that now became Watchung. So Smalley was one of the founding fathers of Warren. So the whole history and of that cemetery is captured in this notebook that was done for an Eagle Scout project. And we also have some grave rubbings of some of the more interesting graves around this room. And that was also done by a Girl Scout. So again, our attempts to get the young people involved.